Right now, your dog is lying on the living room floor, doing absolutely nothing, but their brain is running a full biological simulation of your exact physical presence. In 2022, researchers at Cornell University put unanesthetized dogs into a magnetic resonance imaging scanner. They mapped a massive, thick physical nerve highway connecting the olfactory bulb straight into the occipital lobe. That is the visual cortex. No other animal on Earth has this specific documented anatomical bridge. When your dog smells your scent lingering in the air, they do not just recognize a vague odor. They literally see you, but you are not there. You grabbed your car keys, closed the front door, and vanished into a void. Within the first 30 minutes of your absence, their blood cortisol levels explode by up to 70%. The biological stress is total. Therefore, the absolute panic eventually has to stop. Their isolated brain begins to construct a literal clock out of thin air. The exact biological mechanism they use to calculate the precise millisecond of your return defies every single assumption modern science has ever made about animal intelligence, space, and the flow of time. But to understand what actually happens inside an empty house, you have to completely dismantle your human understanding of reality. You are a modern primate with a digital calendar, a smartphone, and an abstract concept of the future. You experience time as a sequence of numbers on a screen, but the animal waiting on your rug experiences time as a physical, heavy substance that can be inhaled. You leave for work in the morning. As you walk out the door, you leave behind a massive, invisible cloud of your individual scent. But as the hours pass, those microscopic molecules of shed skin and sweat do not just fade away into nothingness. They move. They react to the thermodynamics of the architecture. Warm air rises along the walls of your apartment, cools at the ceiling, and sinks heavily into the center of the room. Your dog sits there, equipped with up to 300 million olfactory receptors, watching this invisible weather system distribute your decaying molecules in a perfectly predictable daily rhythm. They do not need a watch. They are reading the literal physics of the air. But could a dog actually tell time with their nose? Professor Alexandra Horowitz from the Dog Cognition Lab proved this invisible machinery with an elegant experiment on a dog named Jazz. Jazz was entirely predictable, always waiting at the front door at the exact same moment every single afternoon just before his owner returned. Therefore, the researchers manipulated the thermodynamic clock. They brought freshly worn clothes belonging to the owner into the house. They used mechanical fans to artificially blast the living room with a massive, fresh concentration of the owner's morning scent. The results shattered our understanding of canine perception. Jazz was completely fooled. Because the physical air inside the house smelled exactly like morning, the dog absolutely believed it was morning. Jazz did not go to the door, did not wait, and missed the owner's actual return entirely. The dog was not tracking the sun outside the window. The dog was tracking the radioactive decay of the human being they love. But time is not the only fundamental structure breaking down when you leave the house. Their entire motivational architecture collapses the second the deadbolt clicks. In 2013, researchers Horn, Huber, and Range published a landmark study on something called the secure base effect. They placed dogs in a room and gave them a highly complex puzzle toy tightly packed with food. When the owner sat in the room, even if the owner was perfectly silent, completely motionless, and doing absolutely nothing to help, the dogs worked relentlessly to solve the puzzle. They clawed, chewed, and fought for the food. But the moment the owner stood up and walked out of the room, the dogs simply gave up. The researchers therefore sent a complete stranger into the room to sit in the exact same chair. The dogs ignored the puzzle entirely. The presence of a new human provided absolutely zero motivation. This is not separation anxiety. This is existential anchoring. Without you in the room, the puzzle loses its fundamental meaning. You are not just their companion or their food provider. You are the invisible battery powering their entire interaction with physical reality. You act as the absolute center of their spatial universe, and without you, the world is not worth exploring. And this extreme psychological reliance creates a terrifying cognitive trap. Because when the door closes, your dog hits the absolute limit of their cognitive processing power. In 2014, researchers at the Messerli Research Institute in Vienna ran 42 dogs through rigorous behavioral tests to measure object permanence. They used a setup called sham baiting, placing a highly desirable food reward into a moving container while the dog watched. The results were staggering. Out of 42 subjects, only 2 dogs managed to pass the strict control conditions. 2. The canine brain is heavily wired to prioritize immediate, flashy visual movement over cold spatial logic. Therefore, when a visual distraction occurs, their brain actively overwrites the logical information about where a hidden object went. When you get into your car and drive to the office, you do not exist in a location called the office. The concept of an office does not exist. The concept of a commute does not exist. Out of sight means your physical form has effectively ceased to exist in their immediate spatial grid. You are a ghost. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable realization about what you actually represent to this animal. You might assume they only miss you because you are the creature with opposable thumbs who opens the meat cans. But the brain scans show a completely different reality. In 2016, neuroscientist Gregory Burns achieved the nearly impossible task of training unanesthetized dogs to sit completely motionless inside a screaming, vibrating, functional magnetic resonance imaging tube. He wanted to look directly at the canine caudate nucleus, the deep neurological reward center of the brain. He presented the dogs with two distinct stimuli. One was the scent of a highly desirable food reward, the other was the scent of their owner accompanied by praise. The glowing brain scans proved that the vast majority of dogs react just as strongly and often significantly stronger to the mere concept of their owner than to an immediate caloric reward. Out of 13 tested dogs, there was only one single extreme outlier. A terrier mix named Ozzy consistently chose the food over his human 100% of the time. But for everyone else, the human connection completely overrode the ancient evolutionary drive for survival calories. You are literally better than food. So they sit and they wait. But as the silent hours tick by, their physiological anticipation begins to compound. A 2011 study by researchers Wren and Keeling physically measured exactly how dogs greet their returning owners after different lengths of isolation. They tracked the heart rates, the tail wags, the kinetic energy of the reunion. After 30 minutes of separation, the greeting is highly energetic. But after 2 hours of total isolation, the heart rate and physical excitement reach a massive, chaotic peak. Yet here is the bizarre physiological limitation of their internal clock. Whether you are gone for 2 hours or 4 entire hours, the intensity of their explosive joy upon your return is statistically identical. The physiological yearning hits a hard biological ceiling at the exact 2-hour mark. After 120 minutes, they are operating at maximum psychological anticipation, burning energy just waiting for the thermodynamics of the room to signal your return. But the memory of your existence never degrades. The most devastating historical proof of this biological devotion comes from Tokyo in 1925. A Japanese university professor named Dr. Isaburo Ueno died suddenly while at work. His dog, an Akita named Hachiko, had perfectly learned the exact thermodynamic scent clock of his owner's daily routine. Hachiko knew the precise atmospheric shift that meant the professor was stepping off the train. Therefore, for 10 years, every single day, Hachiko walked to Shibuya Station at the exact scheduled arrival time of the train. 10 years, 3,650 days of reading an invisible clock for a ghost that was never coming home. A decade of standing on a concrete platform, waiting for a specific molecular scent profile to roll off the steel train cars, refusing to let the spatial map of his owner dissolve into nothingness. Which brings everything back to you. You pull into your driveway at 6 in the evening. You are exhausted. You are irritated. You are thinking about the 47 unread emails burning a hole in your pocket, the traffic you just fought on the highway, the mortgage payment, the dinner you still have to stand in the kitchen and cook. You turn the key in the deadbolt, the door swings open, and you see your dog throwing their entire body weight against your shins. You pat their head and you assume they are just happy to finally go outside. But you are looking at an animal that has spent the last 8 hours sitting perfectly still in an empty room, relentlessly tracking the microscopic decay of your dead skin cells circulating in the warm air currents of the ceiling. They watched your ghost slowly fade into the carpet. They survived a massive 70% explosion of stress hormones. Their motivation to interact with the physical world entirely shut down the moment you broke the visual line of sight. They waited for the physical physics of the living room to hit the exact molecular threshold that mathematically demands your return. You complain about your day feeling too long because you had back-to-back meetings. They lived an entire lifetime of rising and falling survival anticipation in a single afternoon. You do not just live in their house. You do not just pay for their food. You are the invisible gravity that holds their entire cognitive solar system together. You are time itself.